Hey everybody, it's Michael from michaeldrewmusic.com. Today we are talking about intervals. If you are new to music and that is a new term to you, or if you've been playing for a while, you're just looking to dive into this topic more, you are in the right place. We are going to define intervals. We're going to go over the different kinds of intervals that we have in music, and we're going to look at how do intervals apply to real-world musical situations. That's what we're doing today. We're going to pop on over to the keyboard now and break down the interval. Okay, so first things first, let's define the interval. What is it by definition? Ellison's Music Dictionary defines the interval as the difference in pitch between two tones. We could also say it's the distance from one note to another note. That is an interval. We're measuring distance. Now, one thing that we could do if we played two notes, like if I did this, okay, and I played two notes like that, C to F, we could count half steps. Now, a half step is going to be the smallest distance in music that we travel, right? So if I'm on a C here, one note up, the very, very next note, white key or black key, that would be a half step up, right? And if I go the other way, there's a half step down. So if I've got C to F, if I've got this interval here, I could go, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is 5 half steps. That's one way you can think of it, but in music, that's typically not how we measure intervals. That's not usually how we think of them. Usually the way that we measure the distance from one note to another note is to count scale degrees. So we think letter names. We're going to count letter names, and that's how we think of the interval. So if I go back to C to F here, the way I'm going to measure that is I'm going to count C, D, E, F, 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be a fourth. There's a fifth. There's a sixth, and so on. It's that simple. You're just counting letter names from one note to the next note. There are 4 kinds of intervals in music. There are major intervals, minor intervals, perfect intervals, and the tritone, or the diminished interval, the diminished fifth. And I would like to look at those briefly. Before we get into the 4 different kinds of intervals, we first want to talk about scales, because when we're talking about understanding intervals, we have to understand scales first. I'm working here in the key of C. I'm using all white keys because that's the easiest key to understand music theory concepts. It's just to start in C, right? But it's important to keep in mind that when we play intervals, we have to plug in our key signature. And more on that in a little bit. But for right now, I'm going to work in the key of C, and then we're going to switch to another key, and we're going to see how things work in that key as well, okay? So let's start with C. We have major intervals. Okay, now what is a major interval? A major interval would be based on the major scale, and it would be a second, a third, a sixth, or the seventh. Those would be major intervals. We'll come back to those in a moment, but let's switch now to perfect intervals. What are perfect intervals? Okay, so perfect intervals, we've got a fourth, a fifth, and an octave. Those are the perfect intervals. Now, perfect because they are the same in a major scale and in a minor scale. So they're neither major nor minor. They're perfect. We can think of them as neutral, right? They're the same in a major or a minor key. Those are the perfect intervals. All of the other intervals that I mentioned, the majors, those can be changed to minors. Okay, so if we go back to the major intervals here, we've got the second. How do I make that a minor? I take the top note and I lower it by a half step. That is now a minor second. So this would be a major second here, 1, 2. If I lower it down, now I've got a minor second. Okay, this would be a major third, because again, C has no sharps, no flats, so I'm sticking to the C scale here. That's a major third. How do I make it minor? You guessed it. I simply lower the third by a half step. Now it's a minor third. And same thing with the sixth and the seventh. That's a minor interval. You just take the major interval, you lower the top note by a half step, then you get your minor. The last kind of interval is the one that historically has been surrounded by controversy, right? This is what was called the devil's tone. It was believed in the Middle Ages to conjure up evil spirits. This is the tritone. The tritone, it sounds a little odd. It sounds a little dissonant, a little bit unsettling. You can see why they were so superstitious about it. And that would be a diminished fifth. So if we take a fifth here, perfect fifth, there's no such thing as a minor fifth. A fifth is perfect, again, so it's neither major nor minor. What happens when we take the fifth note and we flat it is now we get the tritone. Okay, we get a diminished fifth. And you can see that is an odd sound, but that's kind of a unique interval in and of itself, the tritone. So let's take a look at how this works itself out in another key. Because remember, key of C is one thing, that's all white keys, but we have to remember that when we're figuring out intervals, we've got to plug in the key signature. We can't just count letter names. It's not that simple. We have to know what key we are in and what scale we are basing this interval on. So let's move to the key of E. Okay, so C has no sharps, no flats. E is going to have 4 sharps. F, C, G, and D are sharped in an E scale. If I want to play a major third in the key of E, I can count E, F, G, 1, 2, 3. Okay, there's a third. But then I need to ask myself, in the key of E, what is sharped? G is sharped. That's one of the sharps, right? So this, there would be our major third, not this, right? Because I have to stick to the E scale if my bottom note is E. So whatever your bottom note is, you have to ask yourself, what is that scale? What is that key? And that's how we're going to figure it out. You know, let's say I want to play a sixth in the key of E, a major sixth. Okay, so if I've got E, I can count my letter names. E, F, G, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's a sixth. Is C sharped in the key of E? Yes, it is. So I get that. There is my major sixth in the key of E. And you would just plug in every key that same way. And that's how you're going to accurately find your intervals. And you can hear them too. You know, you can hear if it's major or minor. You can hear the difference there. So use your ear as well, and that will help to guide you. But certainly we want to understand the theory behind this for sure. Finally, let's talk about some practical applications for intervals. Why does it matter that we even know this stuff? There are a few reasons that I think are really helpful. The first thing that I'll mention is that intervals are helpful for ear training. You may have heard of perfect pitch. That is the ability that someone is born with where they can recognize pitches by ear without seeing them play. They can close their eyes, play a note on the piano, and say, that's a D, just from hearing it. That's rare. Most musicians do not have that ability. I do not have that ability. I do not have perfect pitch. So what we need to do if we don't have perfect pitch is we focus our attention on relative pitch. So relative pitch is the ability to distinguish the distance between two notes, that is the interval, by ear. So we may not be able to tell what those two notes are, what the letter names are, but we can tell what the interval is by ear. And so that is really helpful. And one of the best ways to work on that is to learn some associations. Now, there are associations for every interval. You can look those up. There are different ones based on different songs that you may know. Let's take a look at a couple of brief examples of this. I know that a perfect fourth sounds like Here Comes the Bride. Right? So when I hear that interval, when I hear that sound, bum, bum, ba-dum, I know that's a perfect fourth. So what that means is that if I hear that sound, if I hear that jump, that interval in a different song, I know what interval it is now. And if I know the interval, then I can start to play that song. And so it really gives you a head start when you are trying to learn music. You know, if you can listen to something and you can pick out, oh, I hear that's a jump of a fourth. That's going to really give you a head start when you're learning music. Another great association would be the perfect fifth. That would be Star Wars, right? Okay, so that's ba-da-da-dun-dun, dun-dun. There's a fifth. So when I hear that in a song, I know what they're doing. I know that that is a perfect fifth. So I would learn associations. I think that's a great way to do it. But of course, if we don't know what the interval is, that doesn't really help us. So it starts by knowing what the interval is. And that's where the theory comes in. Now, finally, intervals are crucial to understanding chords. If we want to understand chords, we have to understand the interval. And this is something I get as a teacher sometimes. I have students say, well, I don't want to learn scales, or I don't want to learn intervals. I just want to learn chords. But to understand chords, to be able to play chords well, we really have to understand intervals and scales. And what I want to do is I want to focus in on a certain interval, the third. Okay? Now, we would say that chords are built on thirds. Chords are built on thirds. So here's a C major chord. Okay, and you can see this already just from watching me play it, right? C to E, 1, 2, 3, there's a third. E to G, 1, 2, 3, there's another third. So a chord is simply 2/3 stacked on top of each other. Now here's what's interesting is if you look C to E, major third or minor third? Major third, right? Because E is part of the C major scale. C does not flat the E or anything like that, so that would be a major third. E to G, major third or minor third? Well, go back to the key of E with me for a second. Remember we were talking about the key of E earlier? We're going to sharp F, C, G, and D. So G in the key of E is sharped, so that makes this a major third, which makes this a minor third. Okay, so when we're playing a C chord, we've got a major third on bottom, followed by a minor third on top. Now, what if I do this? Okay, now what do we have? Now we have flipped it around. C to E flat. Remember, we talked about all you do to turn a major third into a minor is just to lower it by a half step. So now we've got a minor third here on bottom. E flat to G. Well, the key of E flat is going to flat B, E, A. There's no G flats there, so that's going to be a major third. E flat to G. So now we've got a minor third on bottom and a major third on top. Okay, so a major chord is a major third followed by a minor third. A minor chord is a minor third followed by a major third on top. And we can continue to stack thirds, of course. We could do this. Right? There's a seventh now. Now we call this a seventh because it's 7 notes from C, but it's still another third, right? We got a third here, we got a third here, we got another third here. And you could keep going. You could add a 9th, an 11th, a 13th. And so if we want to understand major and minor, if we want to be able to build chords and construct chords, we've got to know intervals, you know? So like, let's say this. Let's say I pose a question like this. How do we play an F major chord, for instance? Okay, so let's say I don't know how to play an F major chord, but I understand how intervals work. I can say, okay, well, I know that F is the root note because that's the name, and then we can just count it. F, G, A. A is going to be my middle note, and then A, B, C. C is going to be my fifth, or the next third in the chord, right? 5 notes from F, 3 notes from A. So F, A, C. The only other thing I have to do is ask myself, what is in the F scale in terms of sharps and flats? Do I sharp or flat F, A, or C? No, I just flat the B. There's no B in an F chord, so I know it's all white keys. There it is, right? We could plug in a different one that might be a little bit harder. What if we did a B major chord? How do we do a B major chord? Let's start with B as our root note, and let's count it. B, C, D. Okay, so D is our third. D is the first third from B. And then D, E, F. So we've got B, D, F. But we're not there yet. The next thing we have to do is we've got to figure out, in the key of B, do we sharp any of these 3 notes? Well, B has 5 sharps. F, C, G, D, A, right? So we don't sharp the B. D, yes, we do. F, indeed, we sharp the F as well. So here is our B major chord, right? If we did this, that would be incorrect. So again, we've got to know our scales, we've got to know our key signatures, and we also have to know our intervals to really understand chords. Well, thanks everyone so much for taking the time to check out this video. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave those down below. I would love to hear from you. And if you found this content helpful, please do subscribe to the channel and like this video. That does help me to battle that YouTube algorithm. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful time making music, and I will see you next time.